To introduce our speaker this evening is Clinton School student Carly Benkoff. A New York native, she is a graduate of Cornell. She came to the Clinton School after serving with AmeriCorps in New Orleans. At the Clinton School, she's working to develop local resources for a women's empowerment and employment program in St. Francis County. This summer, as part of her international public service project, she will work on a children's education initiative in Nepal. Would you please welcome Carly Benkoff.
Thank you, Dean Rutherford. Good evening, guests, faculty, staff, and classmates, and welcome to our public program this evening. As Dean Rutherford mentioned, I did live in New Orleans last year, which is why I'm very excited to be introducing our speaker this evening. While living there, it was easy to become consumed by the city. From neighborhood meetings to Mardi Gras parties and cleanup days to political rallies, there was never a dull moment for an AmeriCorps Vista living in post-Katrina New Orleans. And I often forgot that there was even life outside of southern Louisiana. When I would leave the city, everyone that I came into contact with would say things to me like, "Oh, New Orleans, how is it down there?" I could tell by their tone that they were expecting depressing, heartbreaking stories, which I did have plenty of. But my first thoughts always went to the progress that had taken place. There were houses rebuilt and stores reopened. There were many parades that marched through the city and holidays that seemed to pop up every other week. And for anyone who knows New Orleans, it was a very big day when the streetcars started rolling again. After going on about all these great things that had happened, I'd be sure to add in at the end, but there is still a lot of work to be done. Even when faced with adversity, the residents of Louisiana endured, determined to rebuild their communities. For this reason, I admire each of them. It was easy for me to lend a hand, knowing that my life was secure, but it was the community there that led the way, even when they were unsure where it would take us. Tonight, we will hear from one of those residents, but she had an even bigger job to do. As governor of Louisiana, Kathleen Blanco led her community and her state through the tragic disasters of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. Beginning with the preparations made in anticipation of the storms, into the flooding and then the chaos, into the shock and disbelief, and finally into the process of rebuilding, Governor Blanco persevered. She raised her voice for her state, even when it felt like the nation was not listening. And it's for this reason that I admire her. The commitment and dedication that she demonstrated while in office are what I believe to be the true meanings of public service. There's a lot that we can learn from Governor Blanco's experiences, and I want to thank her for sharing them with us tonight. Taking office in 2004, she became the first woman to be elected as governor of Louisiana, which she served until January of this year. We are honored to have her here at the Clinton School tonight, giving her first post-gubernatorial speech outside of Louisiana. Please join me in welcoming Governor Kathleen Blanco.
Thank you, Carly. That was a powerful testament to our existence. I appreciate your hard work. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here, even though Arkansas caused me one of my biggest challenges as governor. Last November, I was just beginning to breathe easy, thinking that my term was winding down quietly. Then Derek McFadden had to go and score 4 touchdowns in a triple overtime game to bring home the Golden Boot. Now, I don't know what happens here when you lose. You had a Razorback victory that day. I had a crisis of massive depression. We couldn't import antidepressants from Canada fast enough. I had to close the Mississippi River Bridge to prevent suicide jumps. So enjoy having the Golden Boot this year. We're planning to win it back, you know. And tonight, the LSU basketball team is hoping to extract a bit of revenge. Sports are wonderful, aren't they? My term as governor ended on January 14th of this year. I can't help smiling ear to ear to have my life back. But there are adjustments. I'm constantly reminded that I'm a former Southern governor. You know you might be a former Southern governor when you trade your motorcade in for a pickup truck. My husband Raymond, who joins me tonight, tells me that when people see me driving around town in a pickup truck, they'll respect me more. I'm getting a lot of respect these days. However, there are times. Last week, my assistant called ahead for an event parking in Baton Rouge, where they expect governors to show up in style, or former governors as well. They asked what kind of car I'd be driving. When she said a black pickup truck, the response was, "Oh, that's nice. That's really nice." You know, in the South, that means you've got to be kidding. You also know that you might be a former Southern governor if you're bombarded with what you think are great invitations to your friends' hunting camps, until you realize these camps are actually secondhand FEMA trailers from Hope, Arkansas. Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted that we have so many students here committed to public service. Let me share some quick personal history, because my story is proof positive that there is no one path to elective office or to public service. For more than 15 years, I was a stay-at-home mom. I raised 6 kids, dogs, cats, snakes, even an alligator. Those years of assembly line diapers, meals, and child rearing made politics, frankly, seem like a cakewalk. That is, until Katrina. After 5 years in the legislature, 7 years on the Public Service Commission, and 8 years as lieutenant governor, I became the first woman governor of Louisiana. It's hard to believe, actually, that I am one of only 4 women in U.S. history ever to have served as a Southern governor. Ann Richards and I were the only 2 elected in our own right, that is, without following an elected husband into office. By my calculations, it's only going to take a couple of 100 years to even out this ratio. So let me encourage Arkansas women from a state that has no trouble producing presidential candidates to accept the challenge and plan to rewrite gubernatorial history. Today, I'm here with 2 missions. First, to share the key lessons every community should learn from Louisiana's experience with hurricanes Katrina and Rita. Second, to discuss the challenges of serving during the toughest of times and how Katrina re-energized the notion of public service. There is perhaps no better place to have this conversation than right here at the Clinton Library. President Clinton made great progress in restoring our sense of responsibility for each other. He expanded opportunity to all Americans and rekindled the spirit of American community. And let me state for the record what every person, even if they don't care to admit it, knows in their gut. We would have seen a much different federal response had Katrina happened under his watch. Why are we still talking about Hurricanes Katrina and Rita today, 2 years later? Because in one instant, any community can be turned upside down. Here in Arkansas, you live with this reality. Just think of the innocent lives lost in the recent deadly tornadoes to hit your state. Emergency planning must never be an afterthought for individuals or communities. Too often it is. I want to take you back to 2005, the Friday before Katrina hit on Monday. The moment the National Weather Service placed Louisiana within reach of Hurricane Katrina, I signed a disaster declaration and activated our evacuation plan. In just 36 hours, we moved an unprecedented 1.3 million people out of harm's way. That is more than 5 times the population of Little Rock and North Little Rock combined. Louisiana had weathered hurricanes of the past. We survived year after year to play another day. But in Katrina, even the perfected and tested hurricane plan was not enough. It was not enough because after the storm, federal levees failed. In no time, we went from rule of law to a full-blown demonstration of Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And in our case, it all went wrong. Circumstance and stubborn human nature left us with approximately 60,000 people who could not, or in some cases would not, evacuate. We had to rescue them from a major metropolitan region instantly made unlivable. When Rita hit less than a month after Katrina and destroyed the western coast of Louisiana, we might as well have been living the life of Job. Our largest city had been underwater for a month. We had flood, fires, and famine. It can only be called a catastrophe of biblical proportions. More than 200,000 housing units were heavily damaged or destroyed. That would be like wiping out every single rental and owner-occupied household in Little Rock and North Little Rock combined and doing it twice. 81,000 businesses were shuttered and 220,000 people lost their jobs. So much for economic development. 176,000 K-12 students were displaced. More than 25 times the debris of the World Trade Center had to be removed. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is just the beginning. It was predicted that we could have lost 90,000 lives in such a catastrophe. Every one of the more than 1,400 Louisianians lost is one too many. But I'm grateful that our early planning dramatically mitigated the predicted death toll. This is why it's so important to continue to plan and learn, and why I want to share 4 lessons. First, you cannot coordinate if you cannot communicate. In the United States, we expect on-demand communications. Could you function if someone took away your Crackberry or Blackberry, cell phone, and your email? Our towers fell. Bell South Central offices flooded, and our entire communication system collapsed, all at once. I had the most advanced satellite phones known to man. I could call every place on earth from New Orleans, but I could not call into New Orleans. No one in the affected zones could communicate. I know of National Guard officers delivering urgent messages by bicycle. Our 21st century technology gave us no greater capability than 18th century Paul Revere, and at least he had a horse. Communities should invest in communication systems that can survive hell or high water, because that's exactly what we were dealing with. Second, be prepared to be on your own for the first 72 hours after any kind of disaster. In our case, I thought federal troops were coming from day one because I asked for them. It turns out that the U.S. Army was not dispatched until 5 days after Katrina. We were not sitting around during that 5-day period waiting for the cavalry, but we were quite surprised when the Canadian Mounted Guard showed up early in the week. We were building up our own force. The U.S. Army arrived after we evacuated the Superdome and the Convention Center. I initiated the largest call-up of Guard forces in America's history. Arkansas was the first state to respond to my call. Thank you, Arkansas. Thank you, Mike Huckabee. Arkansas sent 767 men and women without delay, plus 200 civilians. I want to thank the people of Arkansas. God bless you. We appreciate you. Your brave responders were the first to join our force that later grew to over 30,000. You might have heard about Crazy Cajuns. My wildlife and fisheries agents risked their own lives putting boats in 30 to 40 mile per hour gale force winds. Then Boudreaux, Babineaus, and Thibodeaux converged from the swamps and the bayous in fishing and sporting boats to form a Cajun Navy. In 98-degree heat, they navigated down to power lines, snakes, and gators to pull people out of attics and from rooftops. When Michael Brown's promised buses did not arrive, I commandeered school buses from around the state. School bus drivers can more than manage a fifth-grade fight, but imagine the courage that it took these unlikely responders to drive into a disaster zone amid reports of violence. You heard those reports. These brave citizens of ours became unlikely, but the most American of heroes. Third, you cannot meet unlimited needs with limited resources. Every boot available to me was on the ground. Every asset available to me was on the ground. We were working at 1,000% capacity and calling for help. All states have compacts with each other and with the federal government to fill the gaps when resources run out. You just have to hope these compacts are fulfilled. Fourth, when systems go down, paranoia sets in. During Katrina, the media reported rioting and violence. These reports, however well-meaning, exacerbated a human tragedy. Much later, we found many stories to be inaccurate or, frankly, just exaggerated. But the damage was done. People reacted, rescue efforts were hampered, and valuable resources diverted. I paid the price politically for denying the media access to our own boats and helicopters during the early hours of our rescue mission. We had a very real life and death problem. It seemed unconscionable for me to send in reporters when we needed every available seat for rescues. Managing the national and international press requires a small army. Frankly, we were drowning in reporters when we needed rescuers. Communities should anticipate this problem. Don't get caught diverting more resources, quashing false stories than the resources needed to accommodate reporters. We found out the hard way just how important it is for the private and public sectors to coordinate emergency regional planning. Here's one example. Many nursing homes pre-contracted with the same bus companies in the event of a necessary evacuation of their individual facilities. The same buses cannot be in 2 or more places at once. They just can't. Now we have a well-thought-out, coordinated plan. Katrina changed this country's discourse. For the first time in a long time, people asked the simple question, what can we expect of government? The politics of fear that had made it so un-American to ask questions ended with Katrina. The shortfalls were so obvious that all of a sudden, it again became American to demand answers, whether on our soil or in Iraq, and to question our leaders. Let me be clear. The disaster was so big that the capacity of local and state governments was overrun. We turned to the federal government for help, and they could not deliver quickly either. I have no choice but to conclude that when the Bush administration failed to respond in a timely fashion with manpower, they tried to cover their tracks by responding with a war of words. People were dying while talking heads were pointing fingers, saying, "Shame on you, Louisiana, for being who you are and what you are and where you are." As though we stood on the coastline with a big sign that said, "Come on, hurricanes, hit us, please." Wouldn't that be somewhat like accusing the hunter that Dick Cheney shot of walking in front of his gun? Never mind that the failure of the federal levees was the worst civil engineering breakdown in America's history. I knew that the public trashing I was getting would hurt me politically, but I ordered my staff to quit trying to defend me against this game of gotcha. People were dying, and I told them to use their energy to save lives, that I would deal with the consequences later. Looking back, it became clear to all that it matters when 40% of your National Guard is deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. It matters when our emergency equipment is in Baghdad. It matters when FEMA has been downgraded to a bureaucracy drowning in its own ineptitude. It matters when one of the country's largest cities is underwater for a month. I think one of our local characters said it best when he addressed visiting members of Congress. He said, "If the president wants to frustrate terrorists in Iraq, send FEMA." Louisiana's experience has renewed the national focus on emergency response. FEMA is working hard to become more than a four-letter word. Although this week's admission of formaldehyde in the FEMA trailers doesn't really help their cause much. We talked about the storms, but I can't leave without sharing the progress that we have made. Our people stand determined to build back the Gulf Coast, just as Carly testified. The best and brightest thinkers in the world who are now working in Louisiana have discovered gumbo and boudin. We're reforming the underperforming New Orleans schools. New businesses have joined our robust construction economy. More than 100,000 families now have recovery checks in hand. Their homes are being rebuilt according to new and safer building codes. We have become an incubator for best practices and innovation. Louisiana's coastal people continue to man the massive oil and gas offshore drilling rigs that power our nation. Louisiana's fishermen are again plying the waters of the Gulf to feed our nation. And at the mouth of the Mississippi River, Louisiana's ports are again making it possible for farmers and manufacturers of the central United States to ship their goods out to the world. 10 years from now, Louisiana will surpass even our most ambitious dreams. Because of the new policies I have put in place, we will have stronger houses, a world-class education system, a more diversified and competitive economy, and our citizens will be home. But thank you for taking care of them in the meantime. Politics is an interesting way of coming full circle. After 9/11, the people of this nation were ready to sacrifice and begging for a call to action. Instead of calling on us to make personal sacrifice, President Bush gave unprecedented tax breaks when he really needed the money to fight his wars. After Katrina, the nation did not wait for a call to sacrifice. They simply responded. Katrina is the moment when citizen action came back alive in America. Let me repeat. Katrina is the moment when citizen action came back alive in America. This country saw spontaneous, sustained response from people from all across the country, from all walks of life, and from all incomes. It created a renewed march toward public service. Kindergarten teachers and school counselors who had never traveled alone came to comfort our children. Students like Carly came. People are still coming, and we still need them. Families in Louisiana and Arkansas and surrounding states took in complete strangers for months at a time. Thank you again, Arkansas. I'll always remember the story of this one doctor because it's the story of so many who responded. This doctor's father was a part of the greatest generation. His dad sacrificed years overseas during World War II. The doctor wanted his children to be as proud of him as he was of his own father. So when Katrina struck, he closed his office and he came to Louisiana. He told me that he had never felt better about his work in medicine as he did in this particular experience. We all want to be a part of that great American spirit, don't we? We all want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. This was a tremendous opportunity. But don't you think that it is in part due to the mobilization that started with Katrina that we are seeing the overwhelming turnout at the polls today? I do. People young and old are determined to have a say in what it means to govern this country. This mobilized nation came to symbolize the importance of citizen action through public service at all levels. I was so proud of the speed at which our own citizens organized to become change agents in our region. Groups such as Women of the Storm and Citizens for One New Orleans made their voices heard both in Baton Rouge and in Washington. They made a real difference. Nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity, the Red Cross, New Leaders for New Schools, and many church organizations provide outlets for the many volunteers pouring into the region to help. Service groups like AmeriCorps are still working there. New Orleans has become a laboratory for public service. The great need for rebuilding homes, schools, and medical facilities may be standard fare for the developing world, but it's also surprisingly necessary right here in the U.S. Public service also includes government workers and elected officials. I watched the demands on our own state workers test even the most committed souls. Members of my team would sometimes come up to me and they were exhausted, and they'd say, "Governor, this is hurting my family. When I took this job, I didn't exactly sign up for this." And I'd say, "Neither did I. None of us did. But now this is our mission." Public service in times of crisis tests us all. If you do your work expecting a huge thank you, you may never get it. People are rightfully infuriated when they are living in a recovery and their lights don't work. Their living room furniture is the debris on the sidewalk outside, and their neighborhood is in ruins. Some people you are working the hardest for may be the least able to give thanks. If conditions are dire, sometimes people cannot be expected to stop and think of your sacrifice, you who are doing the public service. Some will be embarrassed to have found themselves in a dependency mode. They've never been there before. You have to understand all of this, and you have to realize that you receive your thanks from knowing that you have been there and that you have made a difference. Eleanor Roosevelt said that if you're going to be in politics, you have to grow a skin as thick as a rhinoceros. I think I have 2 layers of rhinoceros skin, but this applies to people in public service. I had an interesting conversation with a Bush administration official working on the Gulf Coast. He's a friend of mine, and I caught him in a down moment. He told me he would never encourage anyone to enter public service. It was a thankless business. That day, he was really down. But I left this conversation thinking, Kathleen, of all people, you should feel this way too. And it never occurred to me to think that way. Well, I was feeling battered and bruised too. We had both been called every name under the sun. I realized then, though, as hard as it had been, that I could never be down on public service. It's just too important. There's just too much work to be done. Public service, though, must never be about the one who is working in public service. It must be about those who are served. This lesson is easy to remember, but it's harder to live by. However, if you can strike this balance and stay in public service, you will make significant contributions and lead rewarding lives. Oftentimes, it's in those darkest hours, those toughest moments, when you have the ability to make the greatest differences. And for those who don't say thank you, there will be many more who will embrace you, who will lift you, who will love you for the work that you have done. This country needs dedicated public servants like the students here at the Clinton School of Public Service. The contributions you make will change the face of this country for the better. You are the greatest hope that we have for the future. In closing, let me be very clear. After all the pain and suffering that my people have been through and the challenges that I have had to meet, I still consider it the greatest honor and privilege of my life to have been able to serve during these most unprecedented times. Thank you, and God bless all of you.
Governor, thank you very much. Now we're going to take a few questions from the audience, so let me start right here.
I'm Terry Richard of Cajun descent. Et je parle un peu de le patois acadien aussi. But I had actually a part A and a part B, and one is, as much criticism as was laid at both Ray Nagin and you in terms of how you handled Katrina. I think you did indeed ask for help way in advance, and as I always like to say, I don't know, is there any city or any state that has access to helicopters and rescue boats to actually go in and, where you've got a place where in many places 12, 13 feet underwater to actually help anybody? And whether or not part B of it is there anything going on now to make sure that if anything like that were to happen again, that there would be a response to help? Because I forgot how long after Katrina, something hit close to Houston, and they tried to evacuate Houston, and it was a total nightmare. Had they had the same experience that New Orleans would have had, more people would have died probably in Houston, but I saw nothing in the way of any kind of response to assist. And is there anything that's happening now to address that?
Yes, we did ask for assistance. We had a number of boats. We had 200 or 300 boats available that Wildlife and Fisheries owned. They were prepared to deploy immediately. They did deploy. It was not enough. That's why citizens came forward. We've got lots of water, and almost, I would say, many households have boats. We are people of the water. And so citizens, private citizens came to help us. So no state actually has enough resources to handle the magnitude of the situation that we were dealing with. We were asking for help. First responders came from every state in the region and supplemented our own people. We are thankful for that. We have scrutinized our own plans. We have now pre-contracted with all kinds of organizations. We spend a lot of money every year, not wanting to need it, but now we have contractual arrangements with bus companies, with agreements with the federal government that more equipment will be sent in immediately upon request. And I would expect that the next response would be far better than the response that we experienced.
Great. Mariah, you've got one back there.
Governor, thank you for joining us. My name is Mariah Hata, and I live here in Little Rock. Can you tell us about the transition from your administration to the new administration in regards to emergency response and preparedness?
Well, now the responsibility lies with the new administration. They have changed the heads of some of the response organizations, meaning that they've lost some continuity. But I would expect that if anything happens, that they would call those people back. I see that they are consulting with many of the leaders that I had in place. They have hired some of the leadership that I had in place. And I think that certainly I'm hoping that this next administration paid a lot of attention to what was going on, and we'll be able to work through the difficulties, and that we would not have something that amounted to a political response. Instead, have a real response.
Questions? Here you go, right here.
Bernardo Williams, Faith and Soul News Magazine, Lafayette, Louisiana. What will it take to get New Orleans back on track economically after Katrina, especially in the light of the fact that 3 years later, only about half of the city has been redeveloped? And what will it take to get Louisiana in general back on track?
One of the big problems that New Orleans experienced was their entire infrastructure went down. The water that was on the land for a month crushed the pipes underground, the sewage pipes, the water pipes, the natural gas pipes. All of that has to be rebuilt. It takes a tremendous amount of money. They're going to need some federal assistance for years to come. People of the city, though, the citizens, the homeowners of the city, some, well, let me say the whole coast, some over 100,000 families now have rebuilding checks in their hands, in their banks. And so people are beginning to be able to make their decisions as to whether or not they can rebuild, how to rebuild, where to rebuild. The city, I think, will take some 10, perhaps 15 years to be whole again. I don't think it's possible to bring this city back up as quickly as all of us initially hoped and desperately wanted to do.
Question. Let's see, we got one right over there. Dennis.
Hi, Dennis Burrow. What was the feedback you got from the international correspondents that came in and watched and observed, and their comments of looking at us as a country outside of ourselves?
Well, the nation views us as the strongest nation. The world views us as the strongest nation in the world, and they were frankly appalled that that there would be such a disconnected response, that it would feel so inept. The magnitude of our experience, though, challenged every system. It challenged the local systems, the state systems, the federal systems, and the only thing left is the private sector, and it challenged the private sector. We've got lots of rebuilding effort yet to come. And I think that, though, because we are in the United States, we will probably be able to do some things much faster than other countries with similar kinds of destruction. And it is my hope that we can move it quickly, but it's tedious. When your physical world goes down, it takes a physical effort to rebuild it.
Yes, back in the back, yes.
I just wanted to make a comment. Our son will graduate from Tulane in the spring, and I think what gets lost in all this about all the bad things that have happened and the 15 years it'll take to come back is that New Orleans basically is a very viable city in terms of tourism and so forth, and people need to realize that and do their conventions there, go spend money. Like we buy all our Christmas presents in New Orleans every time we go down, that kind of thing. That people need to realize that the city is up and running and it's ready for people to come back to, and if people will start doing that, I think maybe we can shorten the 15 years that you're talking about bringing it back.
Yes, the city has vitality. It's the residential areas, but the business district is whole and up and running and is more than willing and able to handle visitors. So thank you for that unsolicited commercial. We appreciate it.
You have a question right back? Yes.
Hi, my name is Cherie Camp. I just left New Orleans yesterday, and I just want to commend you for a job well done. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
I mean, it's amazing.
Thank you.
Question right over here, yes.
Thanks for visiting us, Governor. I'm John Barr. Hope it's not too pessimistic. My wife and I visited 2 years ago, spent 3 days taking pictures all over the city. We're going to return the end of March to try to revisit the same areas and see what's changed. I think what concerns me is the expectations for the development of New Orleans in the future. It was sold off the bat. I remember an announcement on Jackson Square that we will rebuild the city. The economy of New Orleans depends in the past on a large segment of lower income households. I can't visualize that it will ever be what it used to be. And I think this discussion in that regard may limit great possibilities for what it could be. Do you know of any discussions in that regard as opposed to building it back to what it used to be to building up what it could be? Thank you.
Well, none of the planners and none of the community leaders wanted to return to what it was because there were pockets of extreme poverty and living conditions were not wholesome. So that's why I say that our housing units will be stronger and better, that we are rebuilding a better community for all. The state has taken control of 107 of the 115 schools that the city was running. We put them into a recovery district because of academic non-performance over many years, not just because of the storm. So we are attempting to deliver a better education to the children of the city who so desperately need it. And I think that we're going to have a better, stronger city. And the service industries have been strong, and there's nothing wrong with having service industries. We need that, but we need diversified opportunities for all of our citizens.
All right, further question. We have a gentleman on the front row who's had his hand up a long time.
Well, this is a non-Katrina question. As you know, at this moment, we have a woman from Arkansas who's valiantly attempting to break the ultimate glass ceiling. And you yourself in Louisiana have broken many glass ceilings, the ultimate being as governor. And mine, it's a more personal question. Like, what in your family, the town where you grew up, the Cajun culture, what are some of the things that enabled you to do that?
Well, that's a pretty interesting question because actually when I was growing up, I don't think that any of us were encouraged to run for governor. My cousin is here, and I think she can attest to that. She's an Arkansan, and her family was very close to my family. We were very typical, just small town folks. Big family, loving family, but I got married a great husband who loved politics, as I did. Never thought I would ever run for office, period, much less governor. And over the course of some time, I did. It sort of shocked him initially, but once he adjusted to the idea, it took about a week, he threw himself into it with full gusto and has been my champion and my supporter. And frankly, having 6 children who were relatively young when I was first elected to the legislature made it absolutely essential that I had a supporting husband. And he learned how to cook after I became a legislator. And our family has really enjoyed the experience. I worked hard to keep my children connected to everything that I was doing. And it evolved. It just simply was an evolution. I did not have childhood goals of becoming governor. And, but it was one of those naturally evolving experiences that culminated in this juncture.
Question. Annie?
Thank you.
When we get the mic, get the mic.
Thank you for coming and sharing that life story. As the first chairperson of the Arkansas Fair Housing, I made myself an expert on looking at other states and their housing policies, practices, and history. I do know that at the time before the hurricane came, that in the 9th Ward, the housing projects there were some of the worst in the country. My question to you is, in the vision that you have within the next 5 years, 10 years, do you envision there will be another Ward 9 in your state? And if not, how can others learn not to be on the status that you were before in that ward?
We are hoping not to have public housing as dilapidated as it was. We are building new kinds of public housing, mixed income housing that integrates needy people into those communities. We are hoping that the owners of the properties in the 9th Ward can come back and build dignified housing for all citizens. In our recovery programs, we put incentives in place. In fact, loans that do not have to be repaid if landlords agree to HUD-approved rental rates. And we are trying to make it affordable for people to return to the city. All of that is very challenging at a time when you rebuild at the prices demanded in 2006, 2007, 2008. And keep in mind that when you have a massive a bit of destruction like that, the cost of rebuilding is escalated at approximately 30% of whatever it was before the disaster. So it's more expensive and it's harder to make it to keep it affordable. But the challenges are there. We're very aware of them, and we're doing all we can to make sure that we do not have those terrible housing problems that were in existence beforehand.
We have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
This is just a comment. I've been down in New Orleans twice in the last few months, and in my opinion, the French Quarter's in better shape than it was before the storm. St. Charles Avenue looked the same, and as well as the Garden District, and I don't think that's mentioned very often, but I'm certain of this.
That's all part of the original city, and we have all come to realize that the original settlers were very smart. They settled on high land.
Okay, we have one final question right here.
Sorry, that is kind of the question. We are wondering whether you're building in a floodplain again and that it has the potential for the greater society to have to go through all this again to bail you out. How do you really respond to the fact that it's a floodplain?
We have learned that you can rebuild, but you have to rebuild in smart ways. You have to rebuild higher. You have to be careful. Many people are not going back to the areas that are worrisome, and they've made that personal decision. The city has not put any rules down to prevent people from choosing not to live where they shouldn't. But I will tell you what has is the cost of insurance and the availability of insurance. That is the great decision maker.
Let's give another round of applause. Governor Blanco.
Thank you.